Welcome, and thanks for joining us. My guest today is Levi Gundert, Vice President of Intelligence and Risk at Recorded Future. Levi, thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely, pleasure to be here.
And so one of the things that we're talking about today is disinformation. It's one of the most salient topics, I think, within the election year coming up, within just information in general on the internet. So can we begin with you sort of framing the whole idea of disinformation, because this isn't something new, but the way it's being disseminated is definitely new, right?
Certainly. It's a very interesting dynamic, as you said, in coming up on a presidential election year, sort of talking and thinking through the implications of disinformation. But really, it is nothing new, and it's, I hate to wax philosophical, but it's sort of getting to the core of what truth is online now. And what we saw in the prior presidential campaign was real evidence of tampering. And we saw Russia using disinformation campaigns online, these influence operations really designed to create havoc in the American electoral system, and not necessarily to do any sort of vote tampering or anything like that, but really to just try and sway opinions. And what we saw was a sort of systematic effort at creating that chaos. And I think since then, what we've seen online is really remarkable. And the reason for that is because we know there are multiple nations are engaged in disinformation operations, but we're also now seeing sort of the democratization of disinformation, where criminals are now getting into the game because they see opportunities to monetize these types of information operations or campaigns. So we're actually seeing both groups sort of increasing their ability to influence a particular topic. And there's so many different tactics that are involved in this, but it really is a fundamentally interesting time to be sort of living in democracy with all of these online platforms that obviously provide so much goodness and so many benefits. But of course, the flip side of that is they can also be used in ways that we haven't necessarily thought through, as a nation and a country. And there's quite a bit of unintended consequences that I think we're seeing sort of rise to the surface now.
So what does disinformation look like to the average person, right? Because I mean, when I think a lot of us think of disinformation, we think of someone in a trench coat in a shady parking lot, something like that. How can we see it in our everyday life?
So it is interesting. You bring up the trench coat metaphor, and that's definitely accurate. I think what we've seen publicly, organizations like Cambridge Analytica in the past that were specifically hired for information operations that sort of had a shiny veneer on them in terms of who they were, and sort of putting a much brighter public face on what they were doing as a company and organization. And I think the tactics that they're employing are sort of the same tactics that we see nation states and criminals employing now. And there really is a sense that you can go into the dark web, you can go into places online, and you can purchase disinformation services now from individuals or groups that offer them in a very, very granular way. So you can go in there and for $25 you can buy 1,000-word article, and you can buy SEO, search engine optimization services, to propagate that article into news and media outlets and social media. And the price points are pretty low, and it's incredible because you have a full spectrum of sort of services here, everything from sort of criminals opportunistically looking to make money somewhere in the world, down to private firms, right, that sort of put a more glossy veneer on some of the information campaigns. And then obviously you have nation state employees that go to work, and this is their job, is to influence information in a certain way for a certain outcome.
And how does that sort of bump up against the First Amendment, right? I mean, there's certain people that want to put out sort of propagandistic type information, and they have that right to do it. Where does that sort of cross the line versus being something that's protected?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's actually one of those, I think, ethical debates that it's just very interesting to think through and talk through, because obviously the First Amendment is really at the core of who we are as a country, and obviously that protects us from government interference, government retribution, for things that we say, obviously with a couple caveats, but that really is being put to the test here because we recently saw even Facebook came out and said that they're now going to start labeling what they consider fake news as fake news.
Right.
And it's very interesting because now you have a company in the private sector that's going to be the arbitrator of truth on their platform, which is a platform that millions of people are using to share information. And so that puts them in a very unique, situation, a very unique position. And I think some of the research we've done, we have found that there are what I'd call hyper-partisan media outlets that are producing news and information articles, and often disinformation campaigns start by sort of twisting that hyper-partisan news, which is using verifiable facts in, a very, I would say, very, they use those facts in a very aggressive way. And what we've seen is that it's very easy to then sort of piggyback on that to start disinformation campaigns that take some of that hyper-partisan news and really sort of take it even further into a place where objectively it's not true anymore. And so it has been very interesting to sort of watch because, to your point, we obviously care deeply about the First Amendment. It's core to who we are, but I think companies now feel a responsibility to really start doing a better job of at least trying to police some of the content that they know is obviously fake on their platforms.
And how are they bringing in certain technologies to enable themselves to do that? Is AI helpful for that?
Artificial intelligence is helpful. There was actually a paper that was released, I believe, late last week, where the authors of this paper basically said that artificial intelligence is demonstrably good at detecting artificially generated content, meaning if a bot writes an article, artificial intelligence can detect that a bot wrote it, but artificial intelligence is not good at sort of delineating what is true and what is not true. So unfortunately, I don't think that right now technology is not going to be a fundamental participant in sort of arbitrating what's truth here. It can obviously help us determining on social media which accounts are probably fake or which accounts are participating in disinformation campaigns. So it turns out that artificial intelligence is very good at identifying content that's been artificially generated by something like a bot, not a human. But artificial intelligence is not ready for prime time in terms of actually delineating whether the content is true or not.
Great. Well, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk about some trends in disinformation and possibly how you can protect yourself. My guest today is Levi Gundert, Vice President of Intelligence and Risk at Recorded Future. I'm your moderator, Scott Maucione, on the discussion Protecting Data in a Connected World, sponsored by Recorded Future on Federal News Radio, part of the Federal News Network.